Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Monday, December the 16th. Zach Ewing here with a couple of our Advocate LSU beat writers, Koki Riley, and our head football writer, Wilson Alexander. Happy holidays to everybody out there. And as we say at the top of the screen, Merry Portal season. And LSU's having a good Portal season so far. Here to talk about that and break that down as we go forward. Wilson, 5 transfers in for LSU. You know, I kind of feel like a week ago we were a little bit doom and gloom about the guys leaving, and boy, is LSU going to be able to replace them. And they've got some pretty impact guys we're going to go through here. I think things are a lot more positive this week.
Merry Transfermus? Can we make that a thing? Does that sound right? Yeah, being doom and gloom, I think, is kind of an overreactionary way to be when the transfer portal first opens. Because, yeah, you're going to lose guys right off the bat, and you're not going to just add people right away. So it's going to be kind of unbalanced for that first week or so. And I think anybody, if you didn't expect that, then just be sure to expect that in future transfer portal windows, because that's just kind of how it goes. I mean, you're going to lose a bunch of guys right off the bat as they have exit meetings. And then once you start to bring in other potential players on visits, then you'll start to add. And so that's what LSU has done here over the weekend, adding 5 players thus far, 4 who have officially signed, and 1 who is committed, the one commitment being quarterback Michael Van Buren out of Mississippi State. You know, they've started to address certain positions of need. We've seen them add a wide receiver. We've seen them add a tight end, a defensive end, and a quarterback here as well. And then all of a sudden, a cornerback too. And so, kind of around the roster, all these positions getting added to. I think we'll see them add at some of those spots a few more players, particularly like wide receiver and defensive end and things like that. And so I think that the roster is, all these players, we'll see just kind of how things shake out in the spring and into next year, exactly how good they are on this team and that kind of thing. But they're players who are, you should have reason to feel good about the additions of your LSU. I think they bring something to this roster.
Yeah, Koki, all of these guys either started for a Power 4 school at their previous stop, or were at least starting caliber. Like I think Jakeem Jackson started a couple games and got hurt. Some of those guys are more rotational players, but all of them are clearly going to be able to compete for starting jobs at LSU, with the exception of Michael Van Buren, who is more of an insurance policy. But I mean, these are not like just guys you're going to plug in way down on the depth chart.
Yeah, at least that's what it seems like to me. You take for example, a guy like Baron Brown, that's a proven weapon in the SEC. That's a guy who was very explosive as I believe that was his freshman year when he played with Will Levis. But then the last year or two, it hasn't been quite as successful for him. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that he wasn't in a very successful offense. Like now you have him. That's not just another receiver you can add to your room. That's another potential punt and kick return option. So now all of a sudden LSU went from having Greg Clayton hold on for dear life on those punts and kickoffs to having real explosive options in special teams. So, there's a lot of small stuff like that you can add on to the fact that they already have a bunch of the potential starters at potential positions of need. And I don't think they're going to stop from there. You look at a spot like edge rusher where you had Jamari Butler, but you're probably going to need another guy or two since you lost 2 starters in a rotational piece so far. So, and I think some of the negativity that Zach was talking about earlier had a lot to do with just the feeling that kind of continued on from recruiting as well, and some of the recruiting losses that they had. And then you add that on top of a CJ Daniels situation. And then, things just kind of pile up on each other and spiral a little bit. And I think they've kind of stopped the spiral with some of these portal additions. And I think Van Buren was kind of got a lot of positive response yesterday just because, LSU so desperately needed a quarterback. And that was a guy that we didn't really have on our radars, heading into yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the portal, the withdrawals have to come before the deposits, because the players have to be in the portal before you can get the portal. And so it's a little bit backward from the way I think we're used to thinking. And so it can induce some of that panic. But we'll go through each of these additions in a little more detail and maybe talk about what else LSU is seeking, and then also check up on the LSU Baylor bowl matchup and some of the news around that. First, want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. Going to take a quick break, owe you a break here, and then we'll be back and start digging in one by one to these portal additions right after this.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
Okay, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast brought to you by Waste Pro. Going through the transfer portal, you can see the list if you might need to zoom in a little bit or avoid my chin there. But we've got a list of the players on the screen there LSU has added thus far. I was looking this morning, read somewhere that only 19 schools thus far have taken more than 3 transfers. And so that just goes to show you LSU has been very busy thus far, Wilson. So my question is, I don't know that any of these guys are going to be stars. We don't know that yet, but we'll make this our star player segment proudly sponsored by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. At which of these positions, which of these guys do you see having an immediate impact at LSU?
Barry and Brown, I think, is going to probably so far is probably the biggest name of this group next year, or ends up being that way. Because, as Koki mentioned earlier, kind of the multiple ways that he can affect games. Not only is he someone who, as a receiver, is able to come in and kind of play right away at a position of need, but also in the kick return game, and specifically kickoff returns. He's not really ever been a punt returner, but he has been a really effective kickoff returner during his career. He has an SEC record 5 kickoff returns for touchdowns through 3 years at Kentucky. And you can see it in his kickoff returns in particular, but also when you watch the rest of his highlights. He's got a lot of speed, and he moves really well in space, able to kind of manipulate guys and juke past them in order to pick up extra yardage. And I think that once he's playing with a better quarterback, he could go on to have a more successful season as a receiver. I'm sure that's what he's hoping for, and probably part of the reason that he transferred to LSU is for that reason, because he can now play with a guy like Garrett Nussmeier instead of what Kentucky has had at quarterback the last couple of seasons since Will Levis left. It's hard to really judge him as a receiver in how good he can be because of how limited Kentucky was throwing the football. But you still saw things in his tape that I think in that LSU saw in his tape that suggests that he could be pretty productive. But also because of what he can bring as a kickoff returner with those 5, SEC record 5 touchdowns. I think that he's probably the one who jumps off the page immediately.
Koki, you agree, or you have another name?
Yeah, I agree, but I think we should probably mention another name since we've talked about Barry and Brown so much already. I'd say the next probably the next biggest impact guy is probably Bauer Sharp, the tight end. And I say that because he's going to start immediately. Almost, I would assume he starts immediately at least, unless they add another tight end. They could add another tight end into the portal, but Bauer Sharp was Oklahoma's starting tight end this past season. Fills a very specific point of need in terms of his ability to block in the run game. And he was their leading receiver this past season. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Oklahoma had a ton of injuries at receiver and at wide receiver, and just had a very tough passing attack this season. But Sharp was, he's proven that he can at least be an option in the passing game. So SEC experience, right? I mean, SEC experience shows that he can be a decent receiver. Helps them in the run game. Like those are he kind of checks off all the boxes. He also started his career at Southeastern, so obviously has Louisiana ties. I just feel like he's kind of like a slam dunk addition for them, almost like a bit of a no-brainer in terms of how he can help out the team next season. Not saying that the rest of these guys can't be big helps, because I think Jakeem Jackson, he has potential to be very good for this team next year. Jamari Butler, he's in a position to start right away next season as well. And then Van Buren, obviously, but we're going to get to those guys. So I just think Bauer Sharp's kind of like a slam dunk, like a layup, whatever you want to call it, of a transfer edition, because he just checks so many of the boxes you want to see from an LSU transfer.
Yeah, but he's plug and play. And I think let's talk about Jamari Butler and Jakeem Jackson now, because those guys, they don't have sort of the production numbers, although Jamari Butler had 5.5 sacks 2 years ago. He only had 2 this past year. Of course, we're not following Nebraska. We don't know exactly why that may have been, but these are positions of impact, Wilson. I mean, Jamari Butler, if he can come in and be an impact player as an edge rusher, that's a big deal. Jakeem Jackson, we know how much LSU has struggled in the secondary at times over the last 2 years. He started his first 2 games for Florida, then he got hurt. But if he's a guy, he's a top 100 recruit from a couple of years ago. He's a guy who can come in, and you obviously had a couple of star additions in your freshman recruiting class. You can kind of start to remake a couple spots that have been weak points for LSU.
Jakeem Jackson would have been my number 2 choice for star player of this group so far, because of what you just said. He can come in and start right away next year, and that might be the expectation with him. We'll see how things shake out in the spring. But this is a guy who's started the first 2 games at Florida, would have been most likely started for them all year if it weren't for the injury that he suffered, which we don't know the nature of. And so you're looking at a guy who's expected to come back in here and play and contribute. And especially in a cornerback room, you're losing Zach Alexander. You've had a couple of backups enter the portal. So this isn't like a super deep group necessarily, but it seems to be reloading on talent under Corey Raymond. And Jakeem Jackson is a guy who Raymond recruited at Florida. He was a former top 55 recruit in the nation. And he's a guy who is going to probably have a big role on this team next year. When you look at maybe him, Ashton Stamps, and DJ Pickett, that's probably your top. And then I would say maybe PJ Woodland should be a part of that group, and in terms of a competition, and maybe your top 4 corners going into next year at the moment. And so, Jakeem is somebody who could really make a difference for this team as LSU starts to kind of reshape that cornerback room under Corey Raymond. And then with Butler, we'll kind of see, like you said, the production was better in 2023 than it was in 2024. And yet he is addressing a position of needs. Like Koki said, he's going to have a chance to come in here and have a role on this team next year. We'll see who else they add at defensive end, because that'll kind of shape that perception going into the spring and into the rest of the offseason as to who might be a starter. Because if somebody comes in who's been more productive, like maybe a Will Helt, who LSU had on campus this past week out of Purdue, then maybe he's not. But that's the other thing, is LSU's got 2 open spots defensive end. Like, they got to go and add a few more of these guys, because other than Gabe Relaford coming back, who wasn't a rotational player at times, it wasn't a full-time starter, or even like a heavy piece of the rotation. They don't have anybody with experience in that room right now, so they got to go add a few guys in order to be able to sort of fill out the rest of the position.
Yeah. Go ahead, Koki.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to get too caught up with the past production when it comes to Butler specifically. Obviously, that's a great thing to have when you're adding a transfer, but sometimes you got to just bring in potential through the portal as well. Like, Braden Swinson was a guy who had maybe a couple sacks in his career at Oregon, wasn't really a starter there. And it was like one of those additions where I was like, interesting, because again, like there wasn't much of a track record there. And then, a little sprinkling a little bit of development. 2 years later, he's your best pass rusher. So
here's the difference, though. Jamari Butler's only got 1 year of eligibility. He's got to be able to come in and make an impact right now. Whereas with Braden, you had, like you said, 2 years to work with there. And real quick, just sorry to cut you off, Cookie, but Jakeem Jackson, that was the other thing. He's got 3 years of eligibility left, so he's somebody else you can keep around for a while in that cornerback room. Okay, my apologies. Please continue.
And I am curious to see if they add, speaking of the cornerback room, I am curious to see if they add another player there. I wouldn't totally rule it out if the right guy comes along in the portal. I believe they're at least reportedly set up for the cornerback out of Virginia Tech. I think they're trying to set up some sort of visit with him. So that room might not be done either, which is interesting because I think safety is probably a bigger need for them now after they added the one corner that they needed to add. So it's, I don't know. This is all pretty fluid. So it's hard to say exactly like this guy's definitely going to play. This guy's definitely going to play, when they might be adding more players to each of the rooms, even if the guys that they added already could potentially start for them right now.
And then the final guy in this class thus far, obviously there's still weeks to go of this, is Michael Van Buren. And this one was kind of a surprise to me, just because Michael Van Buren started for Mississippi State last year, and Mississippi State was the worst team in the SEC by a good margin. But Michael Van Buren, their offense was okay. Michael Van Buren showed flashes. He had 11 touchdown passes. He threw for almost 1,900 yards. I mean, the numbers weren't spectacular, but he started in the SEC and probably could have gotten a starting job somewhere else, guys. But instead, he chooses to come to LSU, where at least for this next year, he is going to be Garrett Nussmeier's backup. And now for LSU, it's a great insurance policy in case Nussmeier were to get hurt. You have a guy who started games in the SEC who can come in. Michael Van Buren's motivation is a little bit more unclear, but he clearly wanted to come to Baton Rouge, and here he is.
Yeah, he's going to be able to come in next year and sit and develop. And maybe he plays here and there in some like run quarterback packages. If he's on the field next year, it's probably for that purpose, because he's a guy who had 5 rushing touchdowns this past year at Mississippi State. Not a prolific runner of the football, but you saw a few times in the red zone where he ran some zone reads and was able to get in the end zone. And that's obviously what we saw in 2023 can be a productive piece of this LSU scheme if you have a guy who can do that. But mostly it'll be about, probably development and being able to then compete in 2026 and beyond for the starting job. LSU needed to bring in somebody in this as an insurance, not just as an insurance policy, as they had to redo their succession plan after Bryce Underwood flipped to Michigan. And this is kind of your first sign of seeing them figure that out as they plan for the post Nussmeier future. Because he'll have 3 years of eligibility if he takes a red shirt, and after playing this year. And so then you look at a guy who could maybe be a multi-year starter for you, and while you spend a year sort of figuring out exactly what he can do, because he showed some stuff as in the deep passing game, especially in his second career start ever at Georgia. Made that a 10-point game with some really nice deep throws, deep touchdowns. And so he's somebody who, if LSU can continue to build on those things, then maybe you've got your guy after Garrett, if he's able to continue to take those steps as an SEC player, because he does offer quite a bit of sort of intriguing potential moving forward because of his skill set.
All right. One headline that LSU has made here, and I think they're not the only school to do something like this, but this could be a factor, frankly, in why they've been successful in the portal. And we all know it's about NIL. We all know things change quickly. Brian Kelly and his wife announced that they are going to match any NIL donations to LSU's fund up to $1 million. So basically double anything that is donated. And again, kind of heard rumors of other coaches doing similar stuff. I know Florida State, Mike Norvell announced today that some deal where he was donating $4.5 million of his salary back to FSU's. I don't know if they specifically said NIL fund, but it's almost like he's taking a pay cut just so that they have more money for players. I mean, it's all interesting, but obviously it is a key to this whole thing. And so that is going to be our key to the portal segment. Brought to you by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. Guys, what was your reaction to this? Brian Kelly criticized at times for not doing more in the portal last year. He said beforehand they were going to do more. They obviously got outbid. It was a special circumstance for Bryce Underwood, but he clearly is kind of putting his money where his mouth is here.
Yeah, this is necessary, but it's also a sign that they're not Texas, they're not Oregon, they're not Texas A&M. I mean, we knew that already, but like if you wanted an obvious sign, this is an obvious sign. And LSU needs more money, and Brian Kelly has kind of gone out in the last few weeks and has basically has essentially campaigned on trying to raise the NIL funds for the program, and they want to be really competitive with those top teams. They have to get up there in terms of money, and it's not going to get any easier when you added revenue sharing to that as well. So I think revenue sharing can help a school like LSU that has a pretty robust athletic foundation. But when it comes to NIL and sort of that grassroots campaign, it's something that they definitely need to work on. And they just don't really have that level of private funding yet. So I think this is just another very clear, and maybe the clearest sign of that being a need for this program moving forward.
This was the first time recently that Brian Kelly has made it known that it's a need for them moving forward, especially just this offseason as LSU. Before you kind of get into revenue sharing, they're trying to raise money in order to be able to then put that money into NIL, kind of get out in front of revenue sharing, and then also have that revenue sharing, which it seems like Power 4 schools are going to spend anywhere between, on football, $12 to $16 million of the rev share. And so you're also trying to kind of supplement that ahead of time in NIL, and that's why I think part of the reason you're seeing this push, especially after coming off of an 8-4 season. One thing we do need to probably be specific, though, is it's not his personal money going into NIL, contrary to our slide here. We don't know exactly how his money is going to be used because, as he pointed out in his sort of statement about it, he can't directly give to NIL because then that would be just straight up pay for play. And then you get into these NCAA rules that have gotten kind of convoluted and maybe even outdated. But it's also so he's giving to LSU's athletic foundation, the Tiger Athletic Foundation, and we don't know how that money is going to be used. LSU didn't specify. Could it then actually, though, be used on revenue sharing potentially? But we just don't know. And so, but like you said, Zach, this is kind of a trend. Mike Norvell today with the $4.5 million. You saw over the past, for a long time, but especially it feels like maybe the past 5-6 years, coaching contracts, and they're continuing to do so, becomes so enormous. And now some of that money is kind of getting redirected toward players. Norvell was going to be making $9.9 million, but they're coming off of a 2-10 season. Mike Gundy had a restructured contract at Oklahoma State, where off of a 3-9 season, some of his money is going to get put toward revenue sharing as well and get sort of redirected to the players. And so this is kind of a trend. This is sort of the third. There's maybe 3 examples of this within the past few weeks. I don't know that Kelly's is exactly the same as those other 2, whereas for them, it's obviously very much like they're coming off of really, really bad seasons. LSU came off of a not good season by its own standards, but seems to be more directed toward, at least, especially when you kind of look at his comments over the last few weeks, more directed toward trying to, as Koki said, raise that grassroots funding, continue to kind of build up the coffers of LSU's collective so that as the portal is open here, they can go and add top players in a way that they weren't able to last year, because while they had their money had their financial bottom line had improved, they weren't necessarily in a place to get in some of those big bidding wars, and they also just chose not to at times. And with some of those defensive tackles in particular in the spring. And so now they want to, I think, be in a spot where they have that money to be able to kind of spend on this roster going into 2025.
Yeah, it's a good correction to make. It's not directly into NIL. It's actually into what's called the AD's Excellence Fund, which is part of the Tiger Athletic Foundation. But more money, more millions into the athletic department, they can kind of move that around. You're spending that money on something, and then more money can go to this. And the truth is, we don't really know how all that money gets moved around and exactly where it gets spent. What we do
especially
know,
because TAF is private, so not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. And
right. And so, quite frankly, it's a little bit disturbing from if you take a 10,000-foot view. We don't know where all this money is going, but we do know the more money the athletic department has, chances are you're getting better players. That's just the truth of the way this goes now. So that's it, and even more now than it used to be. So it is a key. Tiger Fans Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. Just want to finish the portal discussion, and then we're going to take a break and go into a short bowl discussion. But finish it with this. Where else is LSU looking? I think since the last time we recorded, Emory Jones entered the NFL draft, so he's gone. We know LSU is now losing both offensive tackles. I would imagine that's a position of need. Probably need another safety. You guys mentioned defensive end, another tight end. I mean, there's still a lot of business to attend to here.
Yeah, I'd say safety and offensive line are still big red flashing lights at the moment in terms of absolutely have to have it additions. I think they need to add at least one more safety. I think they could probably use another tight end. I think they're going to add at least one more wide receiver, maybe two. Another edge rusher. They almost certainly need another edge rusher as well. So this team has a lot of needs, and defensive tackle, you could argue as well, especially with JVR Suggs now in the portal. So I don't know if they need necessarily a stud at every single position, but they need somebody just to fill out the depth chart, basically, especially at offensive line. So a lot of needs still left to go, but there's also a lot of players that they're connected with. I mean, there was another name that I just saw who's reportedly they have a safety coming on campus apparently pretty soon. Another new name that just popped up this morning. Braylon Moore, the center / guard at Virginia Tech, is reportedly connected with LSU. They have a lot of they're connected to almost everybody, it seems like, too. Like Eric Singleton, the top player in the portal, had LSU in his top 5 or 6. I don't know if he's going to come here, but like those are the sort of names that they really haven't been connected to that often, except for the exception being like Denver Harris over Brian Kelly's time. And the fact that you see them connected to so many names and so many like quote unquote top names that are in the portal. I think that's just a sign of aggression and their willingness to not just try to get the best players, but try to spend with some of these teams as we've just been talking about.
Some of those names to keep an eye on: Nick Anderson, wide receiver out of Oklahoma, who had a really big freshman year and then missed this past season, pretty much the entire thing with an injury. Mansour Delani out of Virginia Tech, a defensive back, someone who I think Koki kind of referenced earlier. That would be one. I think we've already maybe mentioned Jack Pyburn, the defensive end out of Florida. He's someone who LSU just had on campus. We'll see kind of how that goes. They had Zachariah Poyser on campus last week, but haven't heard a ton of buzz since then. I think he's making a decision soon. We'll kind of see where that goes. But like you said, I think you rounded up kind of the positions that they need pretty well. The big one, I think, like you said, is offensive line and safety. They've got to add at least probably 2 players at both of those positions. Certainly one interior lineman. But I would probably try to go get another one just because the inexperience that's on the roster. And then safety, certainly a couple of safeties to this team moving forward. And then, we're at 5 right now. If we're to take Brian Kelly at his word, he said they'd add around 12. So you still got, about 7 spots, and you could maybe even add more if more guys into the portal. Haven't checked the roster numbers at them yet lately because it's just so fluid in terms of where LSU's at compared to that 85 scholarship limit, which will still be in effect next year, even under revenue sharing. And so, some of that kind of depends on that, but like they could also probably use a punter. They might need to go get a long snapper, stuff like that, depending on how they feel about the guys who they currently have on the team. So, there's a lot of work still to be done. They've gotten off to a solid start here, but they need to just kind of continue to keep up that momentum because they have probably about 7-ish or so spots that they need to continue to around 7 players they need to still go get, and most of them need to be instant impact guys.
Yeah, the roster is going to look quite a bit different in 2025. That is for sure. But one game left in 2024. That's the Texas Bowl against Baylor coming up on New Year's Eve. Going to dig into a little bit of the news surrounding that in our last segment coming up right after this break.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional healthcare for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit classicindustrial.com for more information.
Okay, welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider Podcast, kind of turning our focus just for a few minutes to LSU's bowl game coming up 2 weeks and a day from now against Baylor in Houston. Interesting thing, Brian Kelly had a press conference this week, Wilson, and he mentioned Garrett Nussmeier, who people may forget, he hurt his shoulder in that regular season finale against Oklahoma, came back in the game and played really well, maybe the best he's played all season, but apparently still bothering him a little bit, and that's today's injury report brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. What's going on with Nuss?
Yeah, Garrett, like you said, he had that shoulder injury against Oklahoma, and it was something that he was able to come back from in that game, which was he didn't. Garrett never really got into specifics. We tried to get him from him, and Garrett can sometimes become cagey with some of that stuff. And yet he was able to come back from it, but it's still something that Brian Kelly said they're kind of putting him on a pitch count in order to, there's no real sense that he's going to be it's going to affect his status for the Texas Bowl or anything like that. They're just kind of trying to be careful with him, make sure that thing gets fully healed. And so over this past week, they said that he was maybe about, I think around like 60% in terms of like the number of throws. He was participating in everything. They were just trying to sort of limit how much he was using his arm. And then they were going to ramp that up as they go toward the Texas Bowl because, you just want to be careful with that shoulder coming off of an injury against Oklahoma there at the end of the season where it looked worse than it might have ended up being. But it was still something that, probably the next few days felt pretty sore. And so they want to be careful with him as they move forward.
It's an interesting part of this game. He's going to be missing several offensive line starters. I mean, you want to win the bowl game, but you also don't want to get a serious injury suffered by your starting quarterback. So interesting situation there. But today's show is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. And speaking of that, another thing about bowl games is always motivation, right? Like which team is more motivated to win. I don't think LSU wants to lose this game, but also don't know, you don't have your full team. It's not like you're in a college football playoff game or a major bowl game. It's interesting. And so as we go into the LSU Sports Insiders sports betting segment brought to you by the Queen of Baton Rouge, Koki, this line is down to 1 point. And I think, LSU is favored by 3.5. I think when the line opened, it's down to 1 point. Just goes to show you that they're losing some key players, Will Campbell, Emory Jones. Baylor may have an edge in the motivation department. They could get a big win for Dave Aranda, finish with a winning streak. It's hard to gauge these things.
Bowl games are impossible to gauge because you don't know who's going to play. And I haven't done a deep dive into who's going to play, who's not going to for Baylor in this game. My guess is Sawyer Robertson is going to play because he's eligible to come back next season, hasn't entered the portal or done anything like that. Baylor's offense has been really, really good this season. They won their last 6 games. It went from, it looks like Dave Aranda's going to get fired to now Dave Aranda's totally turned this thing around. And I think the defense got a little bit better by the end of the season as well. So offensively, this is a very explosive unit, and I expect them to give LSU's defense a real challenge, and especially a lot of these younger players who have to play in this game. But Wilson, should we mention the breaking news?
We should. We mentioned Jack Pyburn's name out of Florida. He tells On3 Sports that he is transferring to LSU. He is edge rusher, like we mentioned, somebody who, now you've got him and Jamari Butler at that position. We'll see if they add another defensive end, but that might be it for them. If they are, you know, they've at least like addressed and kind of filled, you know, backfilled kind of some of who they lost, you know, with Braden Swinson, Deshaun Womack, and Savion Jones. They know they got two. We'll see if they go after anybody else, but that is their second edge rusher out of the portal, and somebody who, again, is going to compete for playing time on this team next year.
Yeah, I mean, just so we're now up to 6. We're recording this Monday morning. By the time we post it, it'll probably be kind of old news, but like LSU maybe at 7 or 8 by then at the rate things are going. So obviously another good start another addition to a good start to the portal season for LSU. So Jack Pyburn, the Florida edge rusher, now a member of the LSU Tigers. Tiger fans, you can catch all the sports action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sports Bar and 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails. With top-notch screens and live betting, it's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Well, we'll wrap things up unless LSU happens to get another transfer in the next 5 years. It's always possible the way things are going, but we did want to make some college football playoff picks. This is the last time you guys will be on the podcast before then. I'm not sure. Might do another basketball show later in the week. Not sure quite yet, but let's do this. Let's do an Around the CFP segment brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. So I'm going to do it this way. Indiana Notre Dame opened things up with the first ever on-campus college football playoff game at Notre Dame on Friday night. Then on Saturday, you have SMU at Penn State, Clemson at Texas, and Tennessee at Ohio State. The home teams in these games, guys, are all touchdown favorites or better. So if the chalk holds, you're going to see Notre Dame, Penn State, Texas, and Ohio State moving on. So I'll frame it this way. If you had to pick an upset pick, who would it be, and how convinced are you? Like, would you actually make this pick, or are you just doing it because I'm forcing you to?
My pick would be Tennessee over Ohio State. And I would actually make this pick, I think. You know, Tennessee maybe hasn't been as explosive offensively as they have been in the past with Josh Heupel as the coach. But this is still an Ohio State team that, you know, it's been very good this year. And if they play up to their talent level, then I think they could win the national championship. But they don't consistently play up to their talent level. They should be the most talented team on the field every single game that they've played this year. But we saw, you know, part of it's just coming off of that just awful game against Michigan. But there's some other games that they've just haven't looked great in, even though they've won this season. And so that would be my upset pick. I think Tennessee can go to the shoe and beat Ohio State. You know, that's a pretty good Tennessee defense. And if they're able to, I think they can get it done. I think the Vols might win.
Wow. All right. Koki?
That's such a tough game to pick. I don't feel good about whoever I pick. It's one of those sort of situations. But since Ohio State's at home, I just have trouble imagining they're going to lose 2 straight with the amount of talent that they have and some of the question marks I have with Tennessee's offense. But Wilson's absolutely right, though. I think the most damning thing you can say about Ohio State this season is they haven't played up to their talent level once all year. Never once did you feel like that the Death Star has been rolling. It just hasn't been up, fully functional this season. It feels like. I mean, they've gotten close at times, and they have a lot of blowout wins. But they've been underwhelming, and even in a lot of these blowout wins for halves and quarters at a time. So I just still really worry about Tennessee's offense in this situation on the road with a first-year starting quarterback who has struggled against tougher competition. I'm just going to go to Ohio State, but I don't feel good about it.
I'm going to go with Indiana, guys. I think Indiana could surprise us all on Friday night. I think that offense could get rolling. Notre Dame hasn't really played anybody, if we're being quite honest. They won at Texas A&M in the season opener. After that, their best wins probably Louisville. USC, Army, Navy. They beat some good wins, but not really a great win. And I don't know. We'll see. I think Indiana could pull them into a shootout. We'll see how that goes. But the winner of that game,
I would love that for Indiana so much. Just after everybody doubting them all year, and they haven't played anybody. Which, yeah, I mean, they haven't played a tough schedule, but I would just love that for Indiana to kind of get some of the last laugh.
Oh, it'd be great. And I think it'd be so cool for that fan base to be in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl. And listen, Georgia Notre Dame be a fantastic game too. Probably what the Sugar Bowl wants. But I keep an eye out for Indiana and also SMU. That team is good. And Penn State has had trouble winning big games. You got to favor Penn State, but I would keep an eye out for them. The only game where I really feel like the underdog is probably in a heap of trouble is Clemson. I don't see them going to Austin and winning myself. But we'll see what happens. Those games start Friday, and it'll be a lot of fun. Today's episode of LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States. From large capital projects to commercial projects or your small quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business. They're a proud community partner, supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. Yeah, I just put together, speaking of those 4 upsets, if you think all 4 favorites are just going to roll, go parlay them. You can get 2-1 odds on that. So it's actually more likely than not that one of them gets picked off and upset this weekend.
Yeah, like I think SMU has a chance against Penn State. I don't think it's a great chance. I don't think it's a good chance, but I think there's a chance there because I think SMU is kind of an underrated team. And Clemson, Texas, I don't think Clemson has much of a shot there, but at the same time, they're more talented than we thought the 12 seed was going to be in that sort of situation. So I think all these games are games I want to watch. I think that's the most important part of this entire first round, I'd say.
All right, that's going to do it for our show today. We'll check back with you. I mean, the holidays are coming up, but the portal season does not stop, baby. And we'll check either later this week or early next week before Christmas with another update on LSU's portal season and how things are going. So for Koki Riley and Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching today. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.